And the cross, when in any artistic depiction, at the foot of the cross, underneath it, is the skull.
There is a part of Christian history that historians and scholars have been discussing for a long time. Aside from the books that became part of the Bible, there are also other ancient Christian texts that were not included in the official canon. Some of these contain different perspectives about Jesus and the events surrounding his life, death, and resurrection. These texts have once again become a topic of discussion because of Mel Gibson's planned sequel to The Passion of the Christ. In 2004, Gibson released a film focused on the final hours of Jesus' life. Despite its use of Aramaic, Hebrew, and Latin, and its intense depiction of the crucifixion, it became one of the most successful religious films in history, earning over $600 million worldwide. But there is an important part of the story that the first film did not cover much: the period between Jesus' death and his resurrection. But before we start the discussion, I would like to ask you for a like and please subscribe to our channel. This is a huge help for us content creators, so let's get started. According to Gibson's interviews in recent years, the next movie is expected to focus on this part of the story. Because of this, some ancient writings and traditions that scholars have long studied are once again being given attention. It's important to note that many of these texts are not accepted as official parts of the Bible by most Christian denominations. Nevertheless, they remain important references for understanding how the beliefs of the early Christians were formed and developed. One of the places often mentioned by researchers is Ethiopia, where some of the oldest Christian manuscripts in the world have been preserved. Because of this, it has become an important subject of study. In the context of ancient Christian history, while the public awaits the new movie, this is not just a matter of entertainment. It is also an opportunity to revisit ancient documents, traditions, and questions that have been continuously debated for almost 2,000 years in the history of Christianity. In the broader discussion about the movie and the religious story, there are some ideas that emerge which are deeper than the usual version of the resurrection story. According to some interviews and reports about the director Mel Gibson, there are versions of the script for his next project that have a broader scope than the traditional crucifixion and resurrection narrative. Instead of starting only at the last part of Jesus' life, they are reportedly considering a longer timeline that reaches back to more ancient concepts of the spiritual world, including the idea of heaven, hell, and forces that are unseen by humans. From this perspective, the story is not just about death and resurrection as a historical event, but as part of a larger battle between good and evil that goes beyond the physical world. This is not the usual form of biblical films that most people are used to, where the focus is on Jerusalem, the cross, and the resurrection as physical events. In a broader interpretation, the resurrection is considered the beginning of breaking down the barrier between the visible and the invisible realities. When we look at the history of Christianity, we can see that this kind of thinking also has roots in the ancient traditions and texts that spread in different regions, not just in Europe. One of the places often mentioned in studies is Ethiopia, one of the oldest Christian countries in the world. Christianity here developed its own manuscripts, liturgy, and scripture interpretation, rather than just following European tradition. Liturgy and interpretation of the Bible. Even in the New Testament, there is an early mention of Ethiopia. In the book of Acts chapter 8, it describes Philip's encounter with an Ethiopian official traveling from Jerusalem to Gaza. The official was reading the book of Isaiah and later was baptized after the message of Jesus was explained to him. Although this does not provide the full history of Christianity in Africa, it shows that Ethiopia was already an early part of the wider world of the early church. By the 4th century, the influence of Christianity grew stronger in the kingdom of Aksum, a powerful civilization connected to trade in the Red Sea and the wider Mediterranean world. During this time, the church in the region began to become organized. One of the well-known figures in the spread of Christianity in Ethiopia was Frumentius, a missionary from the Eastern Mediterranean, who later became an important part of the establishment of the Ethiopian church. In this context, it becomes clearer why some modern interpretations of biblical stories extend to broader ideas, not just as a historical retelling, but as an attempt to explain a faith with very deep and wide roots in various cultures and eras. In the history of Christianity, Ethiopia is an important part because it was one of the first places in Africa to embrace the faith in the 4th century. During this time, Frumentius emerged, who is considered the first bishop of Axum. Under his leadership, the church in the region gradually became organized. Because of this, Ethiopia cannot be considered the last place Christianity reached. It is one of the earliest centers that shaped the faith outside of Europe. Over time, a unique church tradition developed in Ethiopia. It has its own books, art, and ways of worship. The Ge'ez language became the main language of the church, used in prayers, sacred texts, and ceremonies, similar to how Latin was used in the Western Church. Before modern printing, all books were copied by hand. That's why every text that survived for hundreds of years is proof that it was valued by the communities that preserved it. This is where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church became important, because it has a wider collection of Christian texts compared to the more well-known Western Bible. While some traditions have a limited number of books, the Ethiopian Canon is broader and includes so-called ancient books that are unfamiliar to most modern readers. This includes books such as 1st Enoch, Jubilees, and Ascension of Isaiah. These are ancient writings that are part of the Old Church tradition and are written in the Ge'ez language. One of the most famous among them is the Book of Enoch. Instead of a simple story of heaven as a peaceful place, it presents a darker picture of the world. There's a rebellion of angels, the sin of man, and a system that involves judgment and spiritual warfare. Because of this, the perspective on Christianity and other traditions becomes broader, not just as a simple story of goodness, but as a more complex picture of the world where there is a struggle between good and evil. In the ancient books called apocalyptic writings, one theme is clear: justice is never lost. In the Book of Enoch, it's not just a simple moral lesson in the story. It shows the idea that kings, rulers, angels, and people who commit violence will face a judgment they cannot escape. Everyone is equal before the higher power of judgment. This book is associated with a mysterious character in Genesis, Enoch, a man who walked with God and was then taken by God. From that short line in the Bible, ancient writers expanded it into the story of a man who was taken to heaven, shown the secrets of creation, and taught about the final judgment of evil. An important point here is that this is not a modern invention. Parts of the Book of Enoch were also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient writings discovered near the Dead Sea that were created even before Christianity spread. This means that it was already part of the old world of religious thought circulating during the time when the first Christian faith was just beginning to form. There is another surprising connection. In the letter of Jude in the New Testament, a prophecy is mentioned that is almost identical to what is in the Book of Enoch. This does not mean that the entire book was accepted by all churches, but it shows that the language and ideas of Enoch were familiar to the early Christian writers. In the world of Enoch, judgment is not small or personal. It is a broad confrontation of the whole world with the truth. The powerful are brought down, and those who thought they were untouchable face a higher throne of justice. Here, too, the concept of the Son of Man appears, a figure associated with the final judgment and absolute justice. He is not portrayed as weak or passive, but as a bearer of truth before whom all lies and abuses of power vanish. When this is compared to the more familiar image of Jesus as a teacher and healer, it provides a broader perspective. In this tradition, goodness is not separate from the power of judgment. They exist together. Even in the book of Revelation, this image can be seen, a resurrected Christ who is not depicted as merely quiet or meek. Instead, he is depicted as powerful and unapproachable by any falsehood or violence. From this perspective, the idea of judgment is not simply punishment, but the revelation of all that is hidden. And here emerges the deeper question that has long recurred in the words of ancient texts. If this kind of Christ is the judge of the whole world, what is the meaning of his death, and what really happened after that? One of the most mysterious parts of the story of the resurrection is not the burial itself or the empty tomb, but the days before it. After Jesus was crucified, his body was buried, and it seemed like everything was over. The disciples scattered, the people were afraid, and those in power at that time seemed to have won. On the surface, the story appeared to be over. But in some ancient Christian traditions, that period was not considered empty. Instead, there is a question that has long emerged. If Jesus really died, where did he go? This is where the old idea called the descent to the dead comes in. In the original concepts of Sheol and Hades, these do not refer to the modern image of hell, but to the place of the dead, a silent world separate from the living. In this view, the death of Christ is not the end. Instead, he is depicted as one who enters the very realm of death, not as a victim, but as someone with the power to open its gates. This idea is known in tradition as the harrowing of hell, a depiction in which death no longer remains powerful. Instead, it is shattered from within. In old paintings and icons, you can see Jesus standing on top of the broken door of death, while lifting ancient figures like Adam and Eve. The message is clear. He did not just rise again, but he triumphed over the very power of death itself. In this interpretation, the resurrection is not just about an empty tomb. It is about the fall of death's control over all of humanity. While people on earth mourn, a deeper layer of tradition depicts a greater spiritual battle, a breaking of the wall that humanity has long feared. There is another ancient writing that expands on this perspective, the Ascension of Isaiah. In this text, reality is described as having many levels or heavens, not just a simple heaven above the clouds. In the story, Isaiah ascends to higher levels of heaven and sees the different degrees of glory. But in the midst of this, it also shows the descent of Christ, not as someone weak, but as a presence passing through the levels of the world without being immediately recognized. In this image, life, death, and resurrection are not separate events, but part of a broader movement, a descent into the world of humans and a breaking of the power of death. But if these ideas are this deep and broad, why are they not familiar to most people today? In the history of Christianity, the list of books considered part of the Bible was not immediately unified or fixed. Over time, what is called the Canon gradually formed, the official collection of books used for teaching and worship in the church. This was not a quick or simultaneous process in all places. Different ancient Christian communities had their own texts that they read. There were books that were widely used, and others that were limited only to certain places or traditions. One of the important stages in the formation of the canon was in the 4th century. In the year 367, Athanasius of Alexandria wrote an Easter letter in which he listed the 27 books of the New Testament, which are almost the same as those used by most Christians today. This does not mean that other ancient texts suddenly disappeared, but this was when the standard for what was regularly read in the church became stronger. When a book was not included in regular use in the liturgy, it gradually faded from the daily awareness of the faithful. It remains in some old copies or special traditions, but it is no longer as central as the books that are in the canon. An example of this is the book of Enoch, which remains in some ancient traditions, but was not included in the Western Bible. After many centuries, this text once again gained attention in the 18th century when the Scottish traveler James Bruce discovered copies of it in Ethiopia and brought them to Europe. From there, scholars' interest in the broader world of ancient Christian texts grew. In modern times, many research projects have cataloged, digitized, and studied thousands of manuscripts from the Ethiopian tradition and other ancient collections to better understand the broader history of Christianity. Studies and modern research show that ancient Christianity is broader and more complicated than the simple version that people often see today. Different traditions, texts, and interpretations coexisted in various parts of the ancient world. Amid this renewed interest, ideas connected to the ancient perspectives have resurfaced in public through movies. Mel Gibson's project about the repeated resurrection of Hitchcock is described not just as a sequel, but as a broader cinematic interpretation of spiritual concepts and symbolism. According to reports, the film is planned to be released in two parts, the first on Good Friday in 2027 and the second on Ascension Day of the same year. Good Friday focuses on the crucifixion, while Ascension Day refers to Jesus' ascent to heaven according to Christian tradition. With this arrangement, it becomes clearer that the film was intentionally linked to the religious calendar. So for some, it appears more as part of a broader tradition of faith rather than just an ordinary commercial film. At the same time, there were changes made to the cast and a larger production compared to the first film. According to reports, it will also make heavier use of visual effects to show the unseen aspects of the story, including its spiritual and symbolic dimensions. This is where the ambition of the project becomes clearer. This is not just a simple narration of events, but an attempt to depict the idea of a broader cosmic battle, where death, evil, and power are part of a deeper spiritual reality. From this perspective, resurrection is not just the end of the story, but the beginning of the transformation of the power of death itself. And this is also where it becomes clear why people's reactions are divided, because this kind of interpretation not only provides comfort, but also opens up a deeper and more serious understanding of the origins of faith and the way ancient texts are read up to the present day.